A hand gripped Chelsea Marshall's coat at the doors of St. Bartholomew's Church and pulled her back as the mourners watched. Eleanor Calloway did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You don't belong here," she said loud enough for partners, parishioners, and distant cousins to hear. Rain slashed across the stone steps. Someone laughed. Someone looked away. Richard Calloway opened the door and let the storm swallow Chelsea whole. They believed they were closing a chapter. They did not know that 20 black SUVs were already on the highway moving toward them. If you believe dignity matters more than power, stay with this story until the very end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I read every comment. And if you stand for quiet strength and truth that doesn't shout, consider subscribing. The story starts now. Chelsea Marshall had never been a woman who explained herself. She understood early in life that explanations were often invitations, open doors, for people who were already determined not to listen. So she learned to observe instead, to record, to remember. At 34, Chelsea worked as an operations coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company in Stamford, Connecticut. It was not glamorous work. She managed shipment schedules, reconciled invoices, flagged discrepancies in delivery chains. Her desk was orderly. Her inbox was categorized into folders that followed a logic only she fully understood. Every Friday at 4:45 p.m., she backed up her work files onto an encrypted drive she kept in her desk drawer. No one had taught her to be this way. She'd simply discovered that paper trails told the truth long after people forgot what they had said. When she married David Calloway, she did not expect to need those habits in her personal life. David had not resembled his family. That was what she had believed. The Calloways were a Connecticut dynasty, 3 generations of commercial real estate development contracts, private equity stakes woven quietly through state infrastructure. Their name appeared on museum plaques and hospital wings. They preferred influence to publicity. David, the youngest son, had seemed almost detached from it. He wore tailored suits, but loosened his tie before dinner. He laughed easily. He spoke about reforming internal compliance structures within the company, about modernizing systems that had been operating on a handshake logic for too long. It was during their second year of marriage that he began coming home later. Internal audit, he would say, not looking up from his phone. Chelsea never pressed, but she listened. One night in their kitchen, with the under-cabinet lights casting a low amber glow, David had said something that did not match his tone. "If anything ever feels off," he told her quietly, "check my archived folders, the audit ones." She had looked at him then. He smiled afterward as if to erase the moment. But she had already recorded it in memory first, then in writing later that night in the small navy notebook she kept in her bedside drawer. Chelsea did not spy. She did not search his devices. She did not confront him. She waited. The Calloway home in Greenwich was not technically theirs. It belonged to a family trust established decades earlier by David's grandfather. Chelsea understood that in a legal sense, she occupied a residence that could be withdrawn by signature. That awareness never made her insecure. It made her attentive. Family dinners were performances disguised as tradition. Eleanor Calloway presided over the long walnut table with the composure of someone who had never once doubted her authority. Her silver hair was always set perfectly, her napkin always folded once precisely before being placed on her lap. Richard Calloway, the eldest brother, spoke the most. He handled external relationships, which meant negotiations and quiet settlements. He possessed the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Chelsea noticed things. The way conversations paused when she entered the study unexpectedly. The way financial discussions were reframed into abstractions when she asked neutral questions. The way Harold Whitman, the family attorney, began attending more Sunday dinners during David's so-called audit phase. She did not challenge them. Instead, she began organizing on her own records. She created a private email folder titled Household. Inside it, she forwarded monthly account summaries from the joint checking account she and David shared. She downloaded PDF statements rather than relying on online access. She labeled each file with date and time. When a transfer appeared one Thursday evening, $480,000 labeled Consulting Retainer Northbridge Advisory Group. She did not react outwardly. She copied the transaction number into her notebook. Northbridge Advisory Group did not appear in any prior household expense summaries. 3 weeks later, another transfer. Slightly smaller. Similar labeling. David said nothing. Chelsea said nothing. But she began waking earlier, rising at 5:30 a.m. to review public corporate registries before work. Northbridge Advisory Group existed, but barely. Registered 2 years earlier. Minimal online presence. No listed employees. She wrote that down too. It was not suspicion that guided her. It was pattern recognition. The Callaways operated through layers. Trusts beneath holding companies beneath advisory shells. Chelsea had learned enough in logistics to understand the architecture of concealment. Goods moved invisibly through legitimate corridors. So did money. The shift came gradually. David grew quieter. One evening, he stood by the living room window long after dusk, watching the driveway as though expecting someone. His phone buzzed repeatedly. He silenced it each time. "Are you in trouble?" Chelsea asked, not accusing, simply asking. He turned toward her. There was fatigue in his expression, and something else. "No," he said. Then after a pause, "Not the kind you're thinking." It was not reassurance. 2 weeks later, he left for what the family described as a necessary business retreat. Chelsea did not receive a departure date in advance. She found his side of the closet half empty that morning. His car remained in the garage. Eleanor informed her over breakfast that David required distance from internal conflicts and that Chelsea should respect his privacy. Privacy. It was a careful word. Chelsea returned to Stamford that afternoon and requested certified copies of their joint account statements from the bank branch manager. She cited personal reconciliation needs. Her tone was polite, professional. The manager obliged. When she received the printouts 3 days later, she compared them line by line to the digital copies she had downloaded earlier. 2 entries had slightly altered timestamps. It was minor. To anyone else, insignificant. To Chelsea, it was confirmation that the story was not stable. She did not cry. She did not call Eleanor. She did not demand answers from Richard. Instead, she began documenting every interaction with the Callaway family. Date, time, location, witnesses present, exact wording used. If Eleanor said, "You'll want to consider your position carefully," Chelsea wrote it down precisely as spoken. If Richard commented, "Family unity requires sacrifice," she recorded that too. Language revealed intent long before action did. The day before the funeral of Thomas Callaway, Eleanor requested that Chelsea attend a private meeting in the estate library. Chelsea arrived 5 minutes early. Harold Whitman was already seated at the long table, a slim folder placed before him. No one explained its contents immediately. Chelsea noticed the embossed Callaway Holdings logo on the upper corner. She noticed that her name appeared on a small adhesive tab, marking a signature line. She noticed most of all that David was not present. Eleanor folded her hands. "This is temporary," she said smoothly. "Administrative necessity while David resolves certain matters." Chelsea nodded. She did not reach for the pen. Inside, she could feel the quiet alignment of facts forming. The altered timestamps, the consulting transfers, the absence framed as retreat, the lawyer at dinner, the folder waiting for her signature. It was not chaos. It was preparation. And somewhere beyond the estate walls, movements were already in motion that Chelsea did not yet see. But she would, because while the Callaways believed control was inherited, Chelsea understood something they did not. Control belonged to the person who kept the record. And she had been keeping it from the beginning. The funeral of Thomas Callaway was not designed to grieve a man. It was designed to demonstrate continuity. The stone facade of St. Bartholomew's Church rose against a gray Connecticut sky, solemn and immovable. Black sedans lined the curb in quiet symmetry. Men in tailored coats stood beneath umbrellas, their conversations muted but purposeful. Women in structured black dresses moved like a procession rehearsed in advance. Chelsea Marshall arrived alone. She wore a simple wool coat unadorned and carried no handbag, only a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Inside were copies of documents she had printed the night before. Bank records, email confirmations, notes written in small, controlled handwriting. No one greeted her at the entrance. An usher hesitated before checking the list on his clipboard. Her name was there, but not among the immediate family. Row 4, not row 1. Eleanor Calloway stood at the front of the sanctuary, poised beside the closed casket. Her expression carried neither visible sorrow nor strain. It was the face of a woman who understood that optics outlived emotion. Richard Calloway stood slightly behind her, speaking in low tones to a state senator who had arrived promptly at 10. Chelsea took her seat in row 4. The organ music swelled reverent and restrained. David's absence hung heavier than the incense. Officially, he was handling sensitive corporate transitions. Unofficially, he had not contacted his wife in 19 days. Chelsea counted. She did not look toward Eleanor during the service, though she could feel the older woman's awareness flicker back occasionally like a lighthouse beam assessing distance. The eulogy praised Thomas Calloway's vision, his discipline, his belief in legacy. Words like stewardship and preservation echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Chelsea listened carefully. Stewardship, preservation, words used when assets were involved. When the service ended, mourners filed toward the adjoining reception hall, where silver trays of coffee and catered hors d'oeuvres awaited beneath crystal chandeliers. Conversations resumed at full volume now that solemnity had fulfilled its public function. Chelsea stood near a marble column observing. She noted who approached Eleanor first. She noted which business partners lingered with Harold Whitman. She noted most of all that 3 unfamiliar men in dark suits remained close to Richard at all times. Security, perhaps, or oversight. Chelsea. Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur without rising. Chelsea turned. Eleanor gestured toward a smaller sitting room off the main hall. The door closed behind them with quiet finality. Harold Whitman was already inside. So was Richard. On the polished table lay the folder Chelsea had seen the night before. Eleanor did not waste time. "These are transitional authorizations," she said. "Given David's current unavailability, the family trust requires clarity. It is procedural. Procedural." Chelsea stepped closer, but did not sit. She opened the folder. Power of attorney documents granting temporary authority to Richard over certain jointly accessed accounts. A confidentiality agreement restricting her from discussing internal financial matters with any third party. A residency acknowledgement stating that occupancy of the Greenwich property was contingent upon cooperative compliance with trust directives. She read each page slowly. No one interrupted her. Harold shifted once in his chair. Richard checked his watch. Eleanor watched Chelsea the way one might observe weather patterns, evaluating, anticipating. "You'll see that this protects everyone," Eleanor said. Chelsea traced a paragraph with her finger. Clause 7C referenced discretionary asset redistribution pending audit outcomes. Audit outcomes. The phrase matched David's language. She closed the folder. "I'd like time to review this independently," she said. It was the first full sentence she had spoken in the room. Richard exhaled softly, amusement barely concealed. "This isn't adversarial," he replied. "It's housekeeping." Chelsea met his gaze briefly. She did not respond to tone. She responded to content. "Housekeeping implies dust," she said evenly. "This appears structural." Silence followed. Eleanor's expression did not shift, but something colder settled behind her eyes. "Funeral is not the place for resistance," she said. "Resistance." Chelsea stored the word. "I'm not resisting." Chelsea answered, "I'm reviewing." Harold cleared his throat. "Mrs. Marshall delaying signature could complicate liquidity management." "Liquidity management." Another phrase aligned too neatly with the altered timestamps in her bank records. Chelsea slid the folder back across the table. "I'll need copies." Eleanor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're already holding the originals," she said. Chelsea did not correct her. Instead, she removed her phone from her coat pocket. Without apology, she photographed the first page, then the second, then every subsequent document, ensuring each corner and signature line was captured in frame. Harold stiffened. "That may not be appropriate," he began. Chelsea paused. "Is there a clause restricting personal documentation?" she asked calmly. There was not. Richard stood abruptly. "This is unnecessary." Chelsea finished the final page. "I'll respond within 48 hours. Eleanor stepped closer now, reducing the physical distance between them. "Chelsea," she said softly, "family matters remain inside the family." Chelsea held her gaze. "I agree." The words sounded compliant. They were not. When Chelsea exited the sitting room, the reception hall had thinned. Clusters of guests prepared to depart. The storm outside had intensified. Rain streaked against the tall windows in diagonal sheets. As she crossed the room, fragments of conversation drifted toward her. Temporary restructuring. Federal attention. Containment. Containment. She did not look toward the speakers. Instead, she noted the time, 12:47 p.m. In the vestibule, a young assistant one Chelsea recognized from Callaway Holdings approached her hesitantly. "Mrs. Marshall," the woman whispered, glancing behind her. "You might want to check the updated trust filings." "Why?" Chelsea asked. The assistant swallowed. "They were amended yesterday. Yesterday, the day before the funeral." "Thank you," Chelsea said simply. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Chelsea stepped onto the church's stone steps. Wind pulled at her coat. Guests hurried toward their vehicles, heads lowered against the rain. Behind her, the doors opened again. Richard's voice rose slightly, no longer contained by reception decorum. "She doesn't understand how this works." Eleanor's reply was quieter. "She will." Chelsea did not turn around. She walked down the steps slowly, rain soaking through wool, cold seeping into fabric and skin alike. She felt no panic, only confirmation. The amended trust filings meant asset movement had already begun. The documents presented inside were not precautionary. They were reactive. And somewhere within the widening storm, both meteorological and financial decisions had already been made without her knowledge. The Callaways believed they were consolidating control. They did not yet understand that every attempt to compress the narrative created pressure elsewhere. Pressure left marks, and Chelsea Marshall had begun mapping them carefully. She reached her car and paused before opening the door. Across the street, 2 black SUVs idled briefly before pulling away. She noted the license plates. Not because she feared them, but because patterns mattered. Then she got inside, closed the door against the rain, and wrote one sentence in her notebook before starting the engine. "They are moving faster than they planned." The folder arrived at the Greenwich house before Chelsea did. It sat on the console table in the entryway when she stepped inside that evening, rainwater still clinging to the hem of her coat. The house was quiet in the way large houses often are insulated, composed with holding. No note accompanied the folder, no explanation. The Callaways did not explain. They presented. Chelsea set her keys down carefully and removed her coat. She did not touch the folder immediately. Instead, she walked through the ground floor rooms, first the kitchen, the den, the formal dining room, listening for signs of occupancy. Nothing. David's absence had altered the acoustics of the house. There was no low hum of conference calls from his study, no half-finished mug of coffee on the counter. Even the security system keypad seemed to beat more sharply in the silence. She returned to the console table. The folder was thicker than the one at the church. Inside, 3 separate sets of documents had been clipped together with color-coded tabs. Blue limited power of attorney, green confidentiality and non-disparagement agreement, Red residential contingency notice. Chelsea carried the folder into the kitchen and placed it beneath the under-cabinet lights. She retrieved a legal pad from a drawer and sat down. She read the blue section first. The limited power of attorney granted Richard Calloway temporary authority over joint financial accounts for purposes of operational continuity during Mr. David Calloway's absence. It was framed as efficiency, as stability. But paragraph 4A expanded the authority to include discretionary transfers between affiliated entities if deemed strategically necessary. Strategically necessary. Chelsea wrote the phrase on her legal pad and circled it once. She moved to the green section. The confidentiality agreement prohibited her from discussing any internal family financial structures, audits, or trust-related reallocations with outside parties. Violation would result in immediate forfeiture of residential privileges and associated benefits. Benefits. The language implied dependency. Chelsea had never been financially dependent on the Calloways. Her own salary paid her personal expenses. Her name appeared on the joint account, but the house belonged to the trust. That was leverage. She turned to the red section last, residential contingency notice. It stated plainly that continued occupancy of the Greenwich property required compliance with trust directives, including the execution of attached documents within 72 hours. Failure to comply would be interpreted as voluntary relinquishment. Voluntary. Chelsea closed the folder and exhaled slowly. The sequence was clear now. First, altered bank timestamps. Second, unexplained transfers to Northbridge Advisory Group. Third, David's abrupt disappearance framed as retreat. Fourth, amended trust filings the day before the funeral. Fifth, legal pressure disguised as administrative housekeeping. This was not spontaneous. It was coordinated. Her phone vibrated against the table. Richard. She let it ring once more before answering. Yes, his voice was smooth, almost sympathetic. We're trying to make this easy, Chelsea. You don't need to complicate it. I'm reading, she replied. That's unnecessary. Harold drafted everything to protect you. Protect. Another word to record. What happens if I don't sign? She asked, not challenging, just gathering data. A pause. Then we reassess your living situation. There it was. Is David aware of these documents, she asked. Another pause. Shorter. David understands the broader context, not the question she had asked. I see, she said. You have 72 hours, Richard added. Let's avoid embarrassment. The call ended. Chelsea did not move for several seconds. Then she stood, walked upstairs to the master bedroom, and opened David's closet. His suits were gone, not all of them, but enough. His passport was not in its usual drawer. His laptop charger remained plugged into the wall, unused. She returned downstairs and opened her own laptop instead. At 9:12 p.m., she logged into the joint account portal. Access denied. She attempted again. Access restricted pending account review. She did not react outwardly. Instead, she opened the PDF statements she had downloaded weeks earlier. She cross-referenced transaction IDs with the certified copies from the bank. 2 additional discrepancies surfaced micro-adjustments in timestamps of the Northbridge transfers. Minor shifts of 6 minutes. 11 minutes. Why adjust time at all unless sequence mattered? She wrote down both discrepancies. At 9:37 p.m., her personal credit card app sent a notification. Card declined. She checked the reason. Issuer hold risk assessment, risk assessment. Chelsea closed the app and leaned back in her chair. They were not merely pressuring her to sign. They were isolating her financially. The method was precise. Gradual restriction, administrative justification, no visible aggression. Her phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number. You don't want this to get ugly. She saved the number, no response. Instead, she opened her email and created a new folder titled Calloway Legal. Into it, she forwarded every message received that evening. She attached screenshots of the account restriction notices, She photographed the residential contingency notice and emailed the images to her personal encrypted account. Then she opened a blank document and began constructing a timeline. Date, event, associated transaction, associated communication. Language used. She worked until 1:14 a.m. At 1:15, she closed her laptop and walked into the darkened living room. The rain had lessened outside, replaced by a steady drip from the eaves. She stood at the window and looked at the long driveway. No vehicles, no visible movement. But she knew the surveillance cameras embedded along the perimeter fence would record her presence inside. She turned off the living room lights deliberately and went upstairs. The next morning, Eleanor called. Chelsea answered on the second ring. "I trust you received the revised documentation," Eleanor said. "Yes, and I'm reviewing. You misunderstand your position," Eleanor replied, still composed. "Without signature, you are legally precarious." Chelsea allowed the silence to stretch. Precarious, how, she asked, as a non-beneficiary occupant. There it was. Chelsea's name did not appear on the primary trust beneficiary list. David's did. If David was being reclassified, repositioned, or legally distanced from certain assets, then Chelsea's proximity became inconvenient. "I would like confirmation of David's location," Chelsea said. "That is not your concern at the moment?" It was the only time Eleanor's voice hardened fully. Chelsea noted it. "I'll respond within the 72-hour window," she said. "See that you do." The call ended. At 10:05 a.m., Chelsea dressed in a charcoal suit and drove to the Stamford branch of her bank. She requested certified full transaction histories for the previous 6 months, including back-end time logs. The branch manager hesitated. "These aren't typically released without joint authorization. My name is on the account," Chelsea replied evenly. After a moment, the manager nodded. Paperwork was processed. At 11:42 a.m., Chelsea stepped back into the parking lot holding an envelope thicker than the folder waiting at home. Across the street, a black SUV idled briefly before merging into traffic. She recognized the plate from the church, not because she feared it, but because patterns persisted. She returned home and placed the bank envelope beside the unsigned documents. 2 stacks of paper, 2 narratives, one constructed for her compliance, the other revealing movement beneath it. Chelsea sat down and opened the bank records first, because paper trails did not threaten. They did not posture. They did not call at midnight. They simply told the truth, one entry at a time. And she intended to read every line. The storm arrived just before dusk. It rolled over Greenwich with the slow certainty of something that had been tracking the coastline all afternoon. By the time Chelsea Marshall closed the final page of the bank records, the sky outside the tall living room windows had turned a deep metallic gray. She did not rush. Rain began as a mist then hardened into sheets against the glass. Wind pressed against the old estate's frame, rattling gutters and bending the tops of the maples lining the driveway. At 6:18 p.m., her phone vibrated. A message from Eleanor. "Come back to the church, now." No explanation. Chelsea looked at the unsigned folder on the table. 72 hours had not yet passed. She checked the timestamp on the message. 6:17 p.m., 1 minute ago. Another message followed. "This is your final opportunity to resolve this privately. Privately." Chelsea closed the bank envelope, slid it into her leather portfolio, and stood. She did not change her clothes. The charcoal suit remained dry and unwrinkled. She tied her hair back, slipped her notebook into her coat pocket, and walked to the garage. As she reversed down the driveway, she noticed headlights at the gate. 2 vehicles positioned just beyond the wrought iron fence. They did not follow her immediately. They did not need to. St. Bartholomew's Church appeared almost black beneath the storm clouds when she arrived. Only a few interior lights remained on, casting dim yellow rectangles against stained glass. The parking lot was half empty. Eleanor's sedan sat near the entrance. Richard's SUV idled beside it. Chelsea stepped out of her car without opening an umbrella. Rain soaked her shoulders within seconds. The church doors opened before she reached them. Richard stood framed in the doorway. "You're late," he said. "I came when I received the message." He did not respond. Inside the vestibule was empty of mourners now. The scent of incense had faded, replaced by damp stone and cold air seeping in from the storm. Eleanor stood near the nave entrance. Harold Whitman was beside her, folder in hand again. "You've had sufficient time," Eleanor said without greeting. Chelsea removed her portfolio and placed it on a nearby pew. "I'm still within the 72-hour window. That window closes tonight," Richard replied. "It closes tomorrow at noon," Chelsea corrected calmly. Harold's eyes flickered. Richard's jaw tightened. Eleanor stepped forward. "We've accelerated the timeline," she said. "Circumstances require clarity." "Circumstances?" Chelsea did not ask what they were. "I haven't signed," she said. "That is precisely the problem." Wind howled outside. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the stained glass in its frame. Richard extended his hand. "The documents." Chelsea did not move. "I have questions," she said instead. "This is not a negotiation," Eleanor replied. Chelsea held Eleanor's gaze. "Where is David's silence?" Then measured, "Word is handling matters that require discretion. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're receiving." Richard stepped closer now, lowering his voice. "You don't understand the scale of what's happening." Chelsea considered that. "You're right," she said evenly. "I don't." A flash of lightning illuminated the nave in stark white for a split second. Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Marshall," he began, "refusal to cooperate could expose you to unnecessary complications." "Complications such as?" she asked. "Eviction," Richard said plainly. The word landed between them. Eviction. In a church, under stained glass saints. Chelsea did not react visibly. "I haven't violated any agreement," she said. "You're obstructing trust governance," Eleanor replied. By reading, Richard's composure slipped. By existing in a position that is no longer appropriate. There it was. Chelsea took a slow breath. The doors behind her creaked open as wind pushed against them. Rain sprayed across the stone floor. 2 security guards appeared at the entrance, uncertain but awaiting instruction. Eleanor did not raise her voice. "Chelsea," she said quietly, "you are embarrassing yourself." "No." Chelsea replied softly. "You're doing that." Richard stepped forward abruptly and seized her arm. It was not violent, but it was deliberate. "Enough," he said. Chelsea did not pull away. She let him guide her backward toward the open doors. Sign, Eleanor called after her. Chelsea's shoes slid slightly against the wet stone as she crossed the threshold. Wind whipped her hair free from its tie. Rain soaked through her suit jacket instantly. Richard released her only once she stood fully outside on the top step. "Think carefully," he said. Then he turned and shut the door. The heavy wooden panels closed with finality. Chelsea remained standing. Rain streamed down her face, indistinguishable from anything else. Inside, figures moved behind the glass. Outside, the parking lot stood nearly empty. A woman from the earlier funeral, one of Thomas Calloway's distant relatives, watched from beneath an umbrella near her car. 2 younger men lingered by the curb, whispering. Witnesses. Chelsea did not pound on the door. She did not shout. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and retrieved her phone. She opened the camera app. She turned slowly, recording the storm, the church doors, the security guards visible through the glass. She narrated nothing. Documentation did not require commentary. A crack of thunder split the sky again. Across the street, headlights appeared through the rain. 1 vehicle at first, then another, then more. Black SUVs turning onto the road that led past the church. Chelsea lowered her phone slightly, not fully comprehending. The vehicles did not slow. They continued down the main road, disappearing through the curtain of rain. She noted the direction. At 7:03 p.m., her phone buzzed. Account update. She glanced down. Joint checking account balance 0. Transferred. Timestamp 6:58 p.m., 5 minutes ago. She took a screenshot. Then another notification. Residence access code updated. She closed her eyes briefly. The storm intensified. Wind drove rain sideways now, soaking her completely. Inside the church, silhouettes shifted. No one opened the door. Chelsea descended the stone steps, carefully, one hand trailing along the cold railing for balance. Her car sat alone near the far end of the lot. Halfway down the steps, she paused. Not because she expected them to call her back, but because she felt something settle into clarity. They had chosen public removal. They had chosen witnesses. They had chosen acceleration, which meant something larger pressed behind their decisions. Fear rarely hurried. Exposure did. Chelsea reached her car and opened the door. Water pooled on the seat before she could slide inside. She closed the door and sat still for a moment, rain hammering the roof. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. She answered. "Sign the documents," a male voice said. Calm, controlled. "And this ends quietly." "Who is this?" she asked. A pause. "Someone who prefers discretion." Click. The line went dead. Chelsea did not attempt to call back. Instead, she opened her notebook, its pages damp but intact. She wrote 6:58 p.m. funds cleared. 7:03 p.m. residence code changed. Public expulsion, unknown caller. She underlined the last phrase. Then she started the engine. As she pulled out of the lot, the church receded behind her, its stone facade blurred by rain and distance. They believed they had pushed her into isolation. They believed the storm would discourage movement. They believed silence would follow humiliation. They did not know that humiliation, when documented, became evidence. And evidence did not dissolve in rain. Far down the highway, 20 black SUVs moved steadily toward a destination the Callaways had not yet publicly acknowledged. Chelsea did not see them. Not yet. But their arrival would not be accidental. And neither would hers. Chelsea did not drive back to Greenwich. At the first intersection beyond the church, she turned south instead of north. The storm followed her along I-95, rain blurring the highway lines into pale streaks beneath her headlights. Traffic thinned as the evening deepened. Trucks moved in steady lanes indifferent to weather or human collapse. At 7:42 p.m., Chelsea exited toward a row of budget motels near the industrial corridor outside Stamford. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly against the rain. It was not a place she'd ever imagined staying. That was irrelevant. She parked beneath a dim security light and sat for a moment before stepping out. Her clothes were still damp from the church steps. Her hair clung coldly to her neck. Inside the lobby, the clerk barely looked up from his television. "Room for one," Chelsea said. He handed her a plastic keycard without asking questions. Room 214. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. The room itself was clean enough, neutral bedding, small desk, single lamp window facing the highway. Chelsea locked the door, slid the chain into place, and leaned her back against it for 3 seconds. Not longer. She crossed the room and set her portfolio on the desk. The storm roared against the thin motel window, but the sound felt distant now, like something happening to someone else. Chelsea removed her jacket and hung it over the back of the chair. She laid her notebook flat, smoothing the damp edges carefully. Then she turned on the desk lamp and opened the bank envelope again. Isolation, when structured, became workspace. At 8:06 p.m., she began reviewing the certified transaction logs. Unlike the simplified online summaries, these logs contained back-end entries, processing codes, internal transfer pathways, time zone markers. She compared them to the screenshots she had taken before access was revoked. There it was. The $480,000 transfer to Northbridge Advisory Group had been initiated at 3:12 p.m. But the internal ledger adjustment showed a manual override at 3:18 p.m. 6 minutes. Why adjust the timestamp if not to reposition sequence? She continued. A second transfer, $315,000, displayed a similar override pattern. And a third. The override authorization code linked to an administrative user ID, not David's. She wrote down the ID number. At 8:37 p.m., she opened her laptop. Public corporate registry databases were slow to load in the storm. She waited. Northbridge Advisory Group listed a registered agent in Wilmington, Delaware. The same registered agent appeared on 3 other entities tied loosely to Callaway Holdings. Layering, not illegal in itself, but consistent. Chelsea leaned back slightly. She thought of David's voice in the kitchen weeks ago. Check the audit folder. She logged into her personal cloud storage where she had once backed up shared household files. The audit folder existed. It had been updated last month. She clicked. Inside were subfolders labeled Q2 Compliance Vendor Review, External Advisory. The External Advisory folder was password protected. Chelsea paused. She tried David's birthday. Incorrect. She tried their anniversary. Incorrect. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she entered the model number of David's first car, something he had once joked he would never forget. Access granted. Inside the folder were PDFs of internal memos, email threads, a draft letter addressed to Board Compliance Committee. Chelsea's pulse remained steady as she opened the first memo. Subject, irregular transfer sequencing advisory retainers. David had highlighted lines in yellow. Manual overrides not disclosed to audit subcommittee. Potential exposure if reconciled externally. Recommend immediate freeze pending review. Date 2 weeks before his disappearance. Chelsea stared at the screen. He had not been orchestrating the transfers. He had been questioning them. At 9:02 p.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She let it ring once before answering. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, the same male voice said. Complicated for whom? She asked calmly. A pause. For everyone. I'm reviewing financial discrepancies. That's not your role. It is when my name is attached. Silence stretched. Then sign and you'll be compensated. Compensated? For what, she asked. Another pause. For your cooperation. Chelsea wrote the word cooperation in her notebook as the line went dead. She did not block the number. She saved it. Patterns required continuity. At 9:15 p.m., she opened the draft letter David had prepared for the Board Compliance Committee. It was measured, technical, carefully phrased. He outlined concerns regarding advisory retainer structures routed through shell entities. He referenced exposure risks if external auditors reviewed time-sequenced ledger adjustments. He had not yet sent it. The document properties showed last modified 11:47 p.m., the night before he left. Chelsea leaned back in her chair. The motel room felt smaller now. Not oppressive, focused. They had accelerated eviction because David's audit had threatened exposure. They had attempted to reclassify her legal standing, to remove proximity to financial channels. They had drained the joint account to limit her operational capacity. They had expected compliance under pressure. Instead, she had documentation. At 9:48 p.m., her email inbox pinged. From Eleanor Callaway. Subject, final courtesy. The body of the email was brief. You have until 12:00 p.m. tomorrow. After that, we proceed accordingly. Proceed accordingly. Chelsea checked the metadata. Sent at 9:46 p.m. CC Richard Callaway. BCC Harold Whitman. She forwarded the email to her encrypted account. Then she opened a new document and began drafting a summary timeline. Date and transfer override code. Communication, legal pressure. Her pen moved steadily across paper. No anger, no trembling, only sequencing. At 10:12 p.m., she paused and looked toward the window. Rain continued to fall, but less violently now. Headlights passed occasionally on the highway beyond. Movement existed everywhere. The Callaways were not the only ones in motion. Somewhere beyond Greenwich, beyond even Connecticut, perhaps regulatory mechanisms responded to patterns far larger than family pressure. 20 black SUVs did not travel for domestic disputes. They traveled for containment. Chelsea did not yet know where they were headed. but she knew this acceleration indicated fear. Fear indicated vulnerability. And vulnerability left records. At 10:31 p.m., she opened the Northbridge Registry filing again. The registered address matched a mail forwarding service used by dozens of shell corporations. She wrote down the service name. Then she searched federal compliance announcements from the previous week. One headline caught her attention. Federal Review announced for multi-state real estate advisory structures. No company names listed, just sectors. Real estate advisory. She closed her laptop gently. It was 11:04 p.m. Chelsea removed her damp shoes and placed them neatly by the door. She washed her face in the small motel sink and changed into the spare clothes she kept in her car for emergencies. Before turning off the desk lamp, she reviewed her notebook once more. 6:58 p.m. funds cleared. 7:03 p.m. residence code changed. 9:02 p.m. offer of compensation for cooperation. Audit memo unsent. Override codes, non-David. She underlined the last line twice. They had attempted to isolate her financially, but isolation required control of information, and they had already lost that. Chelsea turned off the lamp and lay on the narrow motel bed, eyes open in the dark. She did not cry. She did not rehearse arguments. She calculated. Tomorrow at noon, the 72-hour window would close. They expected signature or surrender. They would receive neither. And somewhere on a rain-darkened highway, engines continued moving toward a reckoning the Callaways had tried to outrun. Chelsea slept lightly, not because she feared what would come, but because she intended to meet it awake. Chelsea woke before sunrise. The motel room was quiet, except for the low hum of the heating unit cycling on and off. The storm had passed during the night. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains in a pale gray wash, revealing the edges of the desk where papers had been stacked with deliberate care. She did not reach for her phone first. She reached for her notebook. 6:00 a.m. review strategy before contact. She closed it, showered quickly, and dressed in the same charcoal suit she had worn the previous day. The fabric had dried overnight. It still carried the faint scent of rain. At 6:42 a.m., her phone buzzed. Eleanor. Chelsea let it ring twice before answering. "You have 3 hours," Eleanor said without greeting. "It's not noon yet," Chelsea replied. "It will be." A pause. "David would want resolution," Eleanor added. Chelsea did not respond to that. "Where is he?" she asked again. Silence. "Then you are not in a position to demand information." The call ended. Chelsea stared at the blank motel wall for a moment. Not in frustration, in recognition. The urgency had sharpened. That meant something else had moved overnight. At 7:15 a.m., she opened her laptop and searched for civil litigation attorneys outside the Greenwich social orbit. She filtered by experience: financial misconduct, trust, disputes, corporate compliance. One name surfaced repeatedly: Maya Bennett, based in White Plains, New York. Former federal clerk, specialized in forensic financial litigation. No visible ties to Connecticut real estate dynasties. Chelsea dialed the number listed on the firm's website. The receptionist answered with a crisp, efficient tone. "Bennett and Cole." "I'd like to schedule a consultation," Chelsea said, "as soon as possible." There was a brief hold. Then another voice came on the line. "Chelsea Marshall." The voice was calm, clear, direct. "Yes, this is Maya Bennett. I have an opening at 9. No surprise in her tone, no hesitation. Chelsea glanced at the clock. "I'll be there." The drive to White Plains took 38 minutes. Chelsea arrived at a modest but modern office building, glass facade, understated signage, no marble columns. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and fresh carpet. Maya Bennett met her personally at the reception desk. Mid-40s, sharp navy suit, hair pulled into a low bun. No visible jewelry beyond a simple watch. Her eyes were assessing, but not intrusive. "Come in," she said. The conference room was compact but orderly. A legal pad lay centered on the table. A carafe of water stood untouched beside 2 glasses. Maya did not begin with pleasantries. "Tell me what happened," she said. Chelsea placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. She did not dramatize. She sequenced. Joint account drained at 6:58 p.m. yesterday, she began. Access revoked. Trust documents presented with accelerated timeline. Manual override codes on advisory transfers. She slid the certified bank records across the table. Maya scanned the pages quickly. "Who controls the trust?" she asked. "Eleanor Calloway. And your husband, David Calloway. Missing 19 days. Missing as in no contact, or missing as in unaccounted for, no direct contact. Family claims business retreat." Maya leaned back slightly. "Have you filed a missing person report?" "No." "Why not?" Chelsea considered the question. "Because I believe he's being isolated, not disappeared." Maya studied her for a moment longer. "You're not here for revenge," Maya said. It was not a question. "No." "What do you want?" Chelsea did not answer immediately. She had considered that on the drive over. "I want protection," she said finally. "And I want the records preserved." Maya nodded once. "Good, because revenge wastes time." She flipped to the page containing the override codes. "These are internal administrative adjustments," Maya said. "Not illegal by default, but when paired with advisory shell transfers and forced document execution, that's leverage." "Leverage against whom?" Chelsea asked. "Against you, or against someone auditing them?" Chelsea held her gaze. "My husband was auditing." Maya tapped her pen lightly against the table. "Do you have proof of that?" Chelsea opened her laptop and pulled up the external advisory folder. She turned the screen toward Maya. Maya read silently for nearly 2 minutes. When she looked up, her expression had shifted. "Did he send this?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't know." Maya exhaled slowly. "Because if he had, this would already be in federal hands." The room fell quiet. Chelsea's phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. "Time is almost up." Maya glanced at the screen. "Answer it," she said. Chelsea placed the phone on speaker. "Yes, you're stalling," the same male voice said. "I'm reviewing," Chelsea replied evenly. "You've had enough time. Who are you?" A pause. "You don't need to know that." Maya leaned forward slightly but remained silent. "Is this call being recorded?" the man asked suddenly. Chelsea looked at Maya. Maya nodded once. "Yes," Chelsea said calmly. The line went dead. Maya smiled faintly. "They're nervous." Chelsea closed her phone. "They drained your account to limit your ability to hire counsel," Maya said matter-of-factly. "They miscalculated." She opened her own laptop and began typing rapidly. "I'm filing for emergency preservation of financial records," she said, "and a temporary restraining order preventing asset redistribution pending review." "Today?" Chelsea asked. "Immediately." Chelsea watched her. No theatrics, no outrage, just process. "Do you understand what this means?" Maya asked. "It means they can't move money without scrutiny. It means they'll escalate." "They already have." Maya paused, studying her again. "You're very calm." Chelsea considered that. "They're louder," she said. "I don't need to be." Maya allowed a small nod. "Good." At 10:12 a.m., Maya's assistant entered with printed filings. "Clerk's office confirmed receipt," she said. Chelsea felt something settle, not relief. Alignment. Maya turned the screen back toward her. "From this moment forward," she said, "you do not respond to them without me?" Chelsea nodded. Also, Maya added, "You should prepare for retaliation. Smear campaigns, character attacks, maybe even surveillance." "I've already seen surveillance," Chelsea said. Maya's eyes sharpened. "Plates, yes." "Good, keep noting them." Chelsea closed her notebook gently. "What happens at noon?" she asked. Maya checked the time. "Nothing," she said. "Because they no longer control the clock." At 11:57 a.m., Chelsea's phone rang again. "Eleanor." Chelsea looked at Maya. Maya nodded. She answered. "Well," Eleanor demanded. "I've retained counsel," Chelsea said calmly. Silence. "Then you've made a mistake." "I don't believe so." "You've chosen hostility. I've chosen representation." A longer pause. David will be disappointed, Eleanor said. Chelsea's voice did not change. Then he can tell me himself. The line disconnected. Maya leaned back in her chair. They won't like losing control, she said. They never had it, Chelsea replied quietly. Outside the office window, traffic moved steadily along the highway. Somewhere farther south, engines of a different kind moved with intention. 20 black SUVs crossing state lines under federal authority, heading toward offices where compliance memos had been ignored. Chelsea did not know the exact location, but she understood the direction. Escalation had begun. And this time, it would not be contained within a family trust. By early afternoon, the tone shifted. It was subtle at first. Chelsea felt it not through words, but through absence. No new texts, no unknown numbers, no follow-up from Eleanor. Silence from people who had been pressing hourly. Maya noticed it too. They're recalibrating, she said, reviewing the electronic confirmation from the county clerk's office. Emergency preservation orders trigger internal panic. Chelsea sat across from her, hands folded loosely on the conference table. What does panic look like in a family like that, she asked. Phone calls behind closed doors, Maya replied, and accountants who suddenly remember where files are stored. At 1:17 p.m., Maya's assistant entered with an update. Bank compliance acknowledged receipt of the preservation notice, she said. They've flagged the advisory transfers for internal review. Chelsea did not smile. She only wrote the time in her notebook. 1:17 p.m., bank compliance engaged. Maya leaned back in her chair. Now we wait, she said. Waiting for Chelsea was not passive. At 2:03 p.m., she received an email from the Stamford branch manager. Subject clarification regarding transaction overrides. The message was carefully worded. Internal review confirms that certain advisory transfers were manually sequenced under administrative authorization. Documentation available upon formal request. Chelsea forwarded the email to Maya without commentary. Maya's response came within minutes. Good. We'll request full override logs. Paper trails did not argue. They accumulated. At 3:22 p.m., another development surfaced. A voicemail notification from an unknown number. Chelsea played it on speaker in Maya's office. A male voice, different from the earlier caller. Hesitant. Mrs. Marshall. This is Daniel Reeves. I used to work in compliance at Callaway Holdings. I think you should know I raised questions about Northbridge. They terminated me 2 weeks later. He left a callback number. Maya's eyes sharpened. Do you trust him, she asked. I don't know him, Chelsea replied. But the timing aligns. Call him. Chelsea dialed. Daniel answered on the second ring. His voice carried tension, but not aggression. I shouldn't be calling, he said immediately. Then why are you, Chelsea asked calmly. Because what they're doing isn't just internal restructuring, Daniel said. It's shielding. Shielding what exposure? Maya gestured for details. Northbridge Advisory is a pass-through, Daniel continued. Funds move there before being routed again. Off-ledger for audit purposes. Who authorized it, Chelsea asked. Richard, but only after Thomas signed off initially. Thomas Callaway, the patriarch whose funeral had become an execution stage. Did David know, Chelsea asked. Daniel hesitated. He started asking questions. That's when I got sidelined. When was that? Maya interjected. 3 weeks ago. Chelsea wrote 3 weeks audit questions intensify. Why tell me this now, she asked. Because I saw the preservation notice hit compliance this afternoon, Daniel replied. Someone forwarded it internally. They're scrambling. Scrambling how meetings, locked file cabinets, outside counsel arriving. Chelsea's pulse remained steady. Are federal authorities involved, she asked. Daniel lowered his voice. There were whispers. Multi-state advisory review. I don't know details. Would you provide a statement, Maya asked. Another pause. Yes, Daniel said quietly. If I'm protected. We can arrange that, Maya replied. The call ended. Chelsea sat back. The pattern was no longer abstract. Northbridge functioned as a financial buffer. Manual overrides manipulated transaction sequence. Audit concerns had been raised internally. Pressure against her coincided with escalation of audit scrutiny. They tried to isolate you before formal review reached them, Maya said. Remove you from the asset chain. Silence proximity. Chelsea nodded once. They miscalculated the timeline, she said. At 4:08 p.m., her phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Eleanor. It was a news alert. Federal Compliance Task Force expands review into advisory real estate structures. No company names listed, but the sector matched. Maya looked up from her screen. They're not the only ones being reviewed, she said carefully. But if Callaway Holdings is on that radar... She did not finish the sentence. Chelsea didn't need her to. At 4:31 p.m., another call came through. Harold Whitman. Chelsea looked at Maya. Put him on speaker, Maya instructed. Chelsea answered. Mrs. Marshall, Harold began, voice composed but tight. We've received notice of your filings. I assumed you would, Chelsea replied. There's no need for escalation. Preservation is not escalation, Maya interjected, identifying herself. A brief silence followed. Miss Bennett, Harold said coolly. This is a family matter. Family matters don't require administrative overrides, Maya replied. Another pause. You're misinterpreting routine governance, Harold insisted. Then you won't object to full disclosure of override logs. Maya responded evenly. Silence again. Harold's tone shifted. Richard is willing to discuss resolution. Define resolution, Maya said. A financial settlement in exchange for withdrawal of your motions. Chelsea did not speak. How generous, Maya said flatly. We decline. You haven't heard the number. We don't need to. The call ended abruptly. Maya closed her laptop. They're offering payoff because exposure is closer than they expected. Chelsea stared at the blank conference table. They drained my account, she said quietly. Now they're offering compensation. That's fear, Maya replied. At 5:12 p.m., Chelsea stepped outside the building to breathe. The sky had cleared. The air carried the clean sharpness that followed storms. Cars moved steadily along the avenue. Across the street, 2 black SUVs were parked curbside, engines running. Chelsea noted the plates. Not the same as before. Different vehicles. Same pattern. She did not approach. She did not photograph them overtly. She returned inside and wrote 5:15 p.m. 2 SUVs outside Bennett and Cole. Maya read the note without comment. They're monitoring you, she said, but not interfering, yet Chelsea replied. At 6:03 p.m., Daniel sent an email attachment. Internal memo. Subject advisory sequencing risk confidential. The memo confirmed concerns about regulatory exposure if external review matched timestamps to override logs. Richard's name appeared in the approval chain. So did Harold's. David's name appeared only in a comment thread questioning discrepancy. Chelsea closed her eyes briefly. He had not been complicit. He had been inconvenient. Maya leaned forward. This changes the posture, she said. We're not just protecting you now. We're protecting evidence of systemic manipulation. Chelsea nodded slowly. Somewhere miles away, perhaps across state lines, engines continued their steady advance. 20 black SUVs did not announce themselves. They arrived when preparation was complete. Chelsea did not know the hour. But she understood now that the storm at the church had not been the climax. It had been containment, and containment had failed. She closed her notebook gently. Paper trails did not raise their voices. They did not drag people into storms. They did not threaten at midnight. They simply accumulated until movement elsewhere became inevitable. And somewhere beyond her line of sight, inevitability was drawing closer. The silence from David was no longer just absence. It had weight. By the third morning after the preservation order, Chelsea understood that whatever isolation he was under, it was deliberate. Not disappearance, not abandonment, containment. She sat at the small kitchen table in Maya's office break room. She had not returned to Greenwich, and the motel no longer felt strategic. Maya had arranged temporary housing through a client contact in White Plains, quiet and untraceable through obvious channels. Chelsea preferred controlled spaces now. At 7:48 a.m., she opened the audit folder again. She had reviewed the documents twice already. This time, she searched metadata. Creation dates, modification logs, access history. One file stood out. Audio_review_3.m4a. She did not remember seeing it before. The timestamp placed its upload at 11:53 p.m. The same night David had modified the draft compliance letter. She clicked. The recording began with ambient room noise, a chair shifting, a door closing. Then David's voice. Low, controlled. If this reaches the wrong hands, it means they've moved sooner than expected. Chelsea's hand tightened slightly on the mouse. I've documented the advisory sequencing discrepancies. Northbridge isn't consulting. It's buffering. Richard signed off on the override authority after Father approved the structure. A pause. I don't think Mother understands the exposure. Or she does, and she believes influence will insulate us. Another pause. If you're listening to this, Chelsea, check the external registry crosslinks. They didn't scrub all of them. The audio ended abruptly. No dramatic farewell, no declarations, just instruction. Chelsea did not replay it. She closed the file and wrote, audio confirmation, David aware, non-complicit. Maya entered the room moments later. You look different, she observed. He left something, Chelsea said simply. She turned the laptop toward Maya and played the recording. Maya listened without interruption. When it ended, she nodded once. That's not a man orchestrating fraud, she said. That's a man documenting it. He knew, Chelsea replied quietly. Yes, and they knew he knew. Maya folded her arms. That explains acceleration. At 9:15 a.m., a new development surfaced. An internal email chain arrived anonymously in Maya's encrypted inbox. Subject, media containment strategy. The message referenced potential reputational vulnerability if advisory review expands. One line stood out, ensure Mrs. Marshall is characterized as financially unstable should external inquiries arise. Chelsea read it once, then again. She did not react outwardly. Maya did. They're preparing narrative defense, she said flatly. Smear first, discredit proximity. Chelsea closed the email window. They're late, she said. Maya studied her. You're not angry. Anger would slow me down. At 10:02 a.m., the news cycle shifted. A regional financial reporter published a short piece. Sources indicate federal compliance teams are reviewing multi-state real estate advisory entities connected to legacy trusts. Still no names. But the language was tightening. Chelsea's phone buzzed. This time the number displayed belonged to Greenwich. She answered. Chelsea. It was not Eleanor, not Richard. It was a voice she had not heard in 21 days. David, she asked quietly. There was a faint delay on the line. Yes. The single word carried exhaustion. Where are you? She asked. I can't say. Are you safe? A pause. Yes, for now. Chelsea closed her eyes briefly. They're trying to remove you from the trust chain, he said quickly. If they succeed, they can claim distance from advisory routing. I know, she replied. You filed something, he added. Yes. Another pause. That complicates things, he said. It preserves things. Silence stretched. They'll come after you, he said finally. They already have. His breathing shifted slightly. Did they? He stopped himself. Yes, she said calmly. They removed me publicly. The line was quiet for a long second. I'm sorry, he said. Chelsea did not answer that. Instead, why didn't you send the letter? I was waiting for confirmation from one more account trace, he replied. Then Father died, and Richard accelerated. Yes, a door closed faintly in the background on his end. They're monitoring my communications, he said lower. This call won't last. Are you cooperating? She asked. With review teams, he replied carefully. Yes. Chelsea understood the phrasing. You're not alone, she said. Another pause. I know, he replied. The line disconnected. Chelsea placed the phone down gently. Maya had listened without interrupting. He's under advisement, Maya said. Yes. Likely cooperating. Yes. That changes exposure dramatically. Chelsea nodded. If federal teams are involved, preservation orders strengthen his position, Maya continued. You're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting audit continuity. Chelsea absorbed that. At 11:37 a.m., Daniel called again. They've locked down certain internal servers, he said quickly. But compliance access logs show external credentials pulling data this morning. External, as in Chelsea asked. Federal. Maya's eyes met Chelsea's, where Maya asked. Callaway Holdings headquarters, Greenwich. Chelsea wrote 11:37 external credentials active. Somewhere south of Connecticut, 20 black SUVs continued their approach. They had not been visible yet, but movement left echoes. At 1:02 p.m., Harold Whitman emailed. Subject clarification request. He requested confirmation that Chelsea would not pursue further public escalation. Maya drafted the response. We are cooperating fully with lawful review processes. No additional comment at this time. Chelsea read it once, approved it, sent at 2:14 p.m. A rumor reached Daniel through internal chat threads. Multiple vehicles at headquarters, he texted. Not company-owned. Chelsea did not look at Maya immediately. She waited for confirmation. At 2:26 p.m., a local traffic alert appeared. Unusual congestion reported near Callaway Holdings campus due to official vehicles. No details, no names. But the language was neutral and precise. Official vehicles. Chelsea stood and walked to the window. The sky was clear now. Blue even. Storms rarely lasted beyond their purpose. Behind her, Maya spoke quietly. This is where they try to negotiate again. Or deny, Chelsea replied. Yes. Her phone buzzed once more. Eleanor. Chelsea looked at the screen. Maya nodded. She answered. What have you done? Eleanor demanded. Filed lawful motions, Chelsea replied evenly. You've invited outsiders into family matters. You did that when you moved funds. Silence crackled across the line. They're here, Eleanor said finally. I know. You don't understand the damage this causes. Chelsea's voice remained calm. Damage doesn't begin with exposure. It begins with concealment. Eleanor's breath hitched faintly. You've chosen sides, she said. No, Chelsea replied. I chose records. The line went dead. Chelsea did not move. She did not smile. She did not feel vindicated. She felt alignment. Somewhere in Greenwich, engines had stopped. Doors had opened. 20 black SUVs had arrived, not for spectacle, but for process. David was no longer isolated in silence. The Callaways were no longer controlling the clock. And Chelsea Marshall, who had been pushed into a storm under stained glass, now stood in still air holding documentation that did not shout, did not accuse, but did not disappear. The next phase would not be private. It would be procedural. And procedure did not yield to reputation. At 2:41 p.m., the first clear image appeared. Not on national news, not on financial media. On a traffic camera feed Daniel forwarded from a local commuter forum. Callaway Holdings headquarters, an angular glass structure set back from the main road, was partially obscured by a line of black SUVs turning through the security gates. Not 2, not 5, 20. They moved in coordinated sequence one after another, engines steady, no sirens, no flashing lights. Precision without spectacle. Chelsea watched the short clip twice. The vehicles bore government plates. Maya stood beside her, arms folded. They didn't announce it, Maya said. They didn't need to, Chelsea replied. The Callaway campus had always projected control. Private security, landscaped perimeter. Discretion engineered into architecture. Now that perimeter opened without resistance. At 2:49 p.m., Daniel called. They're in the executive wing, he said, voice tight. Conference room A. Richard went pale. Is David there? Chelsea asked. I haven't seen him. Are they seizing records? Maya interjected. Hard drives, physical files, server mirrors. It's structured, not a raid, a compliance action. At 3:02 p.m., a brief statement appeared on the company's internal portal. Callaway Holdings is cooperating fully with routine regulatory review. Routine. Chelsea wrote the time down. 3:02 internal containment messaging. Her phone buzzed again. This time Richard. She looked at Maya. Answer, Maya said quietly. Chelsea did. Chelsea, Richard began, his voice measured but strained. You've overreached. I filed preservation orders, she replied. You triggered scrutiny. No, she said evenly. Your overrides did. A pause. They're asking questions that don't concern you. My name is on the account that funded Northbridge, she said. Silence. Then we can still resolve this. Resolve what? A settlement? For silence, she asked. For withdrawal of hostility. Chelsea let the silence stretch deliberately. You drained my account, she said calmly. You attempted eviction. You publicly removed me from a church. That's not hostility. Richard exhaled sharply. You don't understand how these things work. Explain. Another pause. This level of review can destroy reputations. Then perhaps they should have preserved them, she replied. The line went quiet. Name your number, Richard said finally. Chelsea did not look at Maya. She did not consult notes. I'm not selling absence, she said. Call ended without goodbye. Maya studied her. That was your moment, she said. For what? To choose comfort. Chelsea closed her notebook. I chose record. At 3:27 p.m., a local news helicopter circled overhead near Greenwich. Daniel sent a screenshot. Unconfirmed reports of federal compliance presence at prominent real estate firm. Still no names. But the geography narrowed. At 3:41 p.m., Eleanor called. Chelsea answered. They are misinterpreting internal structure, Eleanor said, voice composed but thinner than before. Are they? Chelsea asked. Yes. Then transparency will resolve it. You've allowed outsiders to distort family governance. Chelsea leaned against the window. Family governance doesn't require manual override concealment. A pause. You think this protects David? Eleanor asked. Yes. And if it implicates him, it won't. How can you be certain? Because I've read the audit memos, Chelsea replied quietly. The silence that followed was longer than any before. You accessed files that weren't meant for you, Eleanor said finally. They were meant for integrity, Chelsea replied. Eleanor's breath was faintly audible. You've aligned yourself against us. I aligned with sequence. The call ended. At 4:12 p.m., Maya's email pinged. Official notice of inquiry expansion. Callaway Holdings named directly. Chelsea did not flinch. The convoy had not been symbolic. It had been procedural. At 4:26 p.m., Daniel texted again. Richard is requesting emergency board meeting. Eleanor refusing to leave conference room. Chelsea imagined it without needing imagery. Richard pacing. Eleanor seated composed but rigid. Harold Whitman attempting controlled language. Compliance officers requesting server credentials. Paper trails converging. At 5:03 p.m., David called again. The connection was clearer this time. They executed, he said quietly. Yes, I didn't know when they would. You expected it, she replied. Yes. A pause. Richard tried to reclassify advisory exposure as independent consulting risk, David said. It won't hold. Are you cooperating formally? She asked. Yes. Will you testify if required? Chelsea leaned against the wall. They tried to settle, she said. With you? Yes. For silence. David exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. For what? For putting you inside it. Chelsea did not answer immediately. I was already inside, she said finally. I just started reading. He was quiet for a moment. They're going to argue you were unstable, he said. I expected that. Does it bother you now? Another pause. They underestimated you, David said. Yes, she replied. The line disconnected again. At 5:27 p.m., a national financial outlet published an update. Federal Task Force executes coordinated compliance review at Callaway Holdings. The convoy was no longer rumor. It was headline. Chelsea did not feel triumph. She felt inevitability. Maya looked up from her screen. This becomes formal litigation now, she said. Civil and potentially criminal. Chelsea nodded. And you? Maya asked. I remain. Maya studied her. You understand this could take years? Yes. And public scrutiny? Yes. You're not leaving Chelsea thought of the church steps, of rain against stone, of her account balance dropping to zero at 6:58 p.m. I'm not staying to fight, she said quietly. I'm staying to finish. At 6:14 p.m., Daniel sent one last message. They're escorting certain executives out for questioning. Chelsea did not ask names. She did not need to. The convoy that had moved silently down the highway had reached its destination. The Calloways, who believed control was inherited, now faced structures larger than lineage. And Chelsea Marshall, who had been pushed into a storm and stripped of access, stood not at the center of spectacle, but at the edge of procedure where documentation met consequence. She closed her notebook and wrote one final line for the day 5:27 p.m. Calloway named publicly. The storm had begun in stone silence. It now unfolded in official language. And official language did not bend for reputation. The first deposition was scheduled 10 days after the convoy arrived. Chelsea did not attend the Calloway headquarters during that time. She did not return to Greenwich. She remained in White Plains in a temporary apartment arranged through Maya's network neutral ground, without family portraits or inherited silence in its walls. Federal inquiry moved on its own track. Civil action moved on another. Maya's filing had converted preservation into structured litigation. Emergency orders transitioned into formal complaints. The language sharpened. Breach of fiduciary duty, improper asset sequencing, coercive pressure tied to financial concealment. Chelsea read every word before it was submitted. She did not add adjectives. She removed them. On the morning of the deposition, she dressed simply navy suit, white blouse, no jewelry beyond her wedding band. Maya noticed. You don't have to wear that, she said gently. Chelsea looked down at the ring. I'm not wearing it for them, she replied. The deposition took place in a neutral conference facility in Stamford glass walls, controlled lighting, long rectangular table set with microphones and water pitchers. Present, Maya Bennett. Opposing counsel from Whitman and Hale. Harold Whitman himself. Richard Calloway. Eleanor Calloway. A court reporter. 2 federal compliance observers seated silently along the wall. Chelsea entered last. No one stood. Richard's posture was composed, but tight jaw, set eyes avoiding direct contact. Eleanor remained immaculately dressed, silver hair set precisely as always. She did not look at Chelsea when she entered. Maya gestured toward a seat beside her. This is a civil deposition, the court reporter stated. All answers are under oath. Richard went first. Maya did not raise her voice. Mr. Calloway, she began, evenly. Did you authorize manual override sequencing for advisory transfers to Northbridge Advisory Group? Richard folded his hands. Those transactions were routine. That wasn't my question, Maya replied. A pause. Yes, Richard said. Under administrative authority. Was that authority disclosed to internal audit? Richard hesitated. I don't recall. Maya slid a printed memo across the table. Audit concern flagged by David Calloway, dated 3 weeks prior. Does this refresh your memory? She asked. Richard scanned it. His eyes flickered briefly toward Harold. It indicates discussion, he said carefully. Does it indicate disclosure? Maya pressed. Silence. No. The word landed flat. Chelsea did not react. She wrote the time in her notebook. 10:12 a.m. Richard acknowledges non-disclosure. Maya continued. Were funds transferred from joint account ending in 4,821 to Northbridge within 6 hours of internal override authorization? Yes. Was Mrs. Marshall notified? No. Was her account access revoked the same evening? I'm not responsible for banking operations, but you requested trust counsel restrict her access. Correct. Richard's jaw tightened. I requested stabilization. Stabilization of what assets? Maya. Then Maya allowed the silence to linger. Assets threatened by audit, she asked quietly. Harold objected. Speculation, Maya rephrased. Were the transfers under scrutiny at the time Mrs. Marshall was asked to sign revised trust documents? Richard looked down. Yes. Chelsea's pen moved steadily. Eleanor's deposition followed. Her voice was calm, unshaken. Mrs. Calloway, Maya began. Did you instruct security personnel to remove Mrs. Marshall from St. Bartholomew's Church on the evening of Thomas Calloway's funeral? I requested privacy, Eleanor replied. Did you instruct removal? Yes. Was Mrs. Marshall in violation of any written agreement at that time? Number, was she within the 72-hour window granted for document review? Yes. Then why was she removed? Eleanor's gaze shifted briefly toward Chelsea. She was obstructing family governance during a vulnerable moment. By reading documents. By refusing alignment. Maya paused. Alignment with undisclosed asset shielding. Harold objected again. Maya adjusted. Alignment with trust directives connected to advisory transfers under federal review. Eleanor's composure faltered slightly for the first time. I was not aware of federal review at that time. Maya slid forward a printed email. Subject, Federal Advisory Review. Preliminary Inquiry. Dated 1 day before the funeral. CC, Eleanor Calloway. Were you unaware? Maya asked. Eleanor's fingers tightened imperceptibly. I was aware of inquiry, not action, yet you accelerated document signature timeline? Yes. Why? To protect the family. From what? Eleanor did not answer immediately. From misinterpretation. Chelsea's pen paused for half a second, then continued. 11:03 a.m. Eleanor acknowledges awareness of inquiry. David's deposition was scheduled separately. He was not present that day, but his audio memo had already been submitted into record under sealed evidence. At 12:17 p.m., deposition paused for lunch. Richard stepped outside to take a call. Eleanor remained seated, still eyes forward. Chelsea stood to refill her water. As she passed Eleanor's chair, Eleanor spoke softly without turning. You think this restores dignity? Chelsea stopped. I didn't lose it, she replied quietly. Eleanor's lips pressed thin. You've aligned with people who will dismantle everything Thomas built. Chelsea considered that. No, she said. I aligned with what Thomas ignored. Eleanor did not respond. After lunch, Harold Whitman was deposed. He attempted precision. He emphasized routine governance. He described advisory structures as standard buffering mechanisms. Maya presented override logs, timestamp discrepancies, bank revocation requests. Did you advise revoking Mrs. Marshall's account access within 1 hour of federal presence at headquarters? Maya asked. I advised caution, Harold said. Caution against what? Potential asset flight. Was Mrs. Marshall attempting to move assets? No. Then why caution? Silence. Harold adjusted his glasses. Because litigation risk increases unpredictability. Maya nodded slightly. And Mrs. Marshall filing preservation orders increased unpredictability, yes. So, you attempted to limit her capacity to act. I advised structural containment. Containment. Chelsea wrote it down. 3:46 p.m. Whitman uses structural containment. By late afternoon, fatigue settled over the room. But something else had shifted. Not volume, weight. Statements made under oath did not vanish. They layered. At 4:22 p.m., Maya closed her folder. No further questions at this time. The court reporter ended the session. Chairs moved quietly. Richard avoided eye contact. Harold packed his briefcase quickly. Eleanor stood slowly adjusting her coat. She finally looked directly at Chelsea. You've chosen consequence, she said. Chelsea held her gaze. No, she replied. You did. There was no anger in her voice, no triumph, only fact. Outside the conference building, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the parking lot. No storm, no raised voices. Just cars pulling away one by one. Chelsea stood beside Maya's car for a moment before getting in. How do you feel? Maya asked. Chelsea considered the question. Aligned, she said. Maya nodded once. That's enough. Somewhere beyond civil deposition transcripts, federal review teams continued their work. Servers mirrored, email chains reconstructed, advisory layers peeled back. The convoy had not come for spectacle. It had come for sequence. And sequence, once exposed, did not reverse. Chelsea closed her notebook in the passenger seat. Not finished, but no longer alone in record. The footage arrived on a Thursday morning. Not dramatically, not in an envelope slipped beneath a door. It came through a formal request. Maya had filed for any surveillance recordings from St. Bartholomew's Church on the evening Chelsea was removed. The church's board, reluctant but compliant under subpoena authority, provided a secured digital copy. Chelsea did not ask to watch it immediately. She waited until the office was quiet. 11:18 a.m. Conference Room B. Lights dimmed slightly to reduce glare on the screen. Maya sat beside her. No commentary, no preparation speech. Chelsea pressed play. The camera angle captured the vestibule. First polished stone floors, muted lighting, stained glass dim in the background. She watched herself enter frame. Still, measured. The timestamp in the corner glowed steadily. 19:00:42. Eleanor stood near the nave entrance. Richard slightly behind her. Harold off to the side. No raised voices were visible. But body language did not lie. 19:02:17. Chelsea's arm was grasped. The grip was firm, deliberate. 19:02:23. She did not resist. 19:02:31. The door opened. Wind pushed inward, rain visible beyond. 19:02:37. Richard released her only once she stood outside. 19:02:41. The door closed. The footage shifted to the exterior camera. Chelsea on the steps, rain heavy, silhouettes watching from the parking lot. 19:03:10. She took out her phone. Documented. Not pleading, not pounding, not shouting. Recording. Maya paused the video. "You were within your review window," she said quietly. "Yes. And they accelerated removal publicly." "Yes." Maya leaned back slightly. "This establishes coercive pressure." Chelsea watched the frozen frame of herself on the stone steps. Her posture had not bent, even soaked, even isolated. She did not feel humiliation watching it. She felt clarity. "They chose witnesses," she said softly. Maya nodded. "And witnesses matter." At 11:47 a.m., a second file arrived. Audio extracted from interior security system. Muted, but audible. They played it. Eleanor's voice. "You are embarrassing yourself." Richard's sign. The wind swallowed part of it, but the tone was unmistakable. Not negotiation, command. Maya stopped the recording. "We won't use this for spectacle," she said. "We'll use it for pattern." Chelsea closed her laptop. "I don't need apology," she said. "You won't get one," Maya replied. At 1:03 p.m. deposition transcripts from the previous week were delivered. Chelsea reviewed them alone. She highlighted 3 lines. Richard acknowledging non-disclosure. Eleanor acknowledging awareness of inquiry. Harold acknowledging structural containment. Language under oath. Language without adjectives. At 2:14 p.m., Daniel called again. "They've frozen several internal accounts," he said. "Federal teams requested mirrored server backups." "Is David still present?" Chelsea asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "He's cooperating." There was something steadier in Daniel's voice now. Less fear, more relief. At 3:22 p.m., a federal compliance liaison contacted Maya directly. Not adversarial, not friendly, procedural. They requested copies of Chelsea's preserved bank logs and override records. Maya looked at Chelsea before responding. "Your documentation strengthens audit sequence," she said quietly. Chelsea nodded. "Send it. Not because it would punish, because it would align." At 4:05 p.m., Eleanor's attorney sent a letter. Not Harold, outside counsel. The tone had shifted. Less dismissive, more contained. "We request mediation discussion regarding civil dispute matters independent of regulatory review." Chelsea read it twice. "They want compartmentalization," Maya said. "Separate civil from federal." "They're connected," Chelsea replied. "Yes, then no mediation," she said. Maya smiled faintly. Understood. At 5:18 p.m., a news outlet published still images from outside Callaway Holdings on the day of the convoy. Black SUVs in line. Officials entering with briefcases, headlines, cautious but direct. Callaway advisory structures under review. Chelsea did not forward the article. She did not share it. She closed the browser tab. At 6:07 p.m., her phone buzzed. David. She stepped outside onto the small balcony of the apartment before answering. "Have you seen it?" he asked. "The footage," she replied. Yes. A pause. "I'm sorry you had to stand there alone," he said. "I wasn't alone," she replied. Another pause. "They'll argue it was emotional escalation," he said. "It was structural," she answered. "Yes." Silence lingered. "Are you prepared for testimony?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you angry?" Chelsea looked out at the quiet street below. "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because anger implies surprise." David exhaled softly. "They underestimated you, yes. They underestimated sequence. Yes." Another pause. "When this is over," he began. Chelsea interrupted gently. "It isn't over," she said. "No," he agreed. The line remained open for several seconds after neither spoke. Then it disconnected. Chelsea returned inside. Maya was reviewing updated filings. "The church footage strengthens coercion claim," she said. "Combined with account revocation and override logs, the pattern is cohesive." Chelsea sat across from her. "I don't want punitive damages framed emotionally," she said. "They won't be," Maya replied. "They'll be structured. Good." At 7:12 p.m., Eleanor sent a message. No legal letterhead, no attorney copied, just a direct text. "You've made your point." Chelsea stared at it for a long moment. Then she wrote back, "This isn't about a point." She did not elaborate. No further response came. Outside evening settled without storm. The church steps remained stone. The footage remained recorded. The words spoken under oath remained transcribed. The convoy remained documented. Chelsea closed her notebook and wrote "footage secured." Pattern confirmed. She underlined "confirmed" once. No triumph, no gloating, just alignment. They had removed her publicly to control narrative. Now the narrative existed in time-stamped frames. Paper trails did not shout. Video did not argue. Under oath, words did not retract easily. And the woman who had stood in rain beneath stained glass had not raised her voice. She had pressed record. The audit folder was no longer private. Once federal compliance formally expanded its inquiry, David's internal documentation ceased to be a precaution and became evidence. What he had highlighted in yellow now appeared in structured review matrices, referenced, cross-checked, sequenced. Chelsea did not attend the federal interviews. She did not need to. Her role was parallel, not central. But when Maya received the request for corroborating timeline documentation, bank overrides, revocation, timestamps, advisory crosslinks, Chelsea understood that the quiet notes she had written at her kitchen table were now intersecting with a broader investigation. Paper trails converged without ceremony. At 8:12 a.m., Maya received an updated disclosure list. Northbridge Advisory Group had been identified formally as a pass-through entity with no substantive consulting personnel. Funds routed there had been redistributed across 3 secondary shells before re-entering trust-controlled investment vehicles. Layering confirmed. Chelsea read the summary once. "They weren't extracting money," she said quietly. No, Maya replied. "They were relocating exposure. Relocating exposure. Not theft in the traditional sense. Shielding from scrutiny. That distinction mattered legally and morally." At 9:04 a.m., Daniel sent a secure message. "They pulled the archived server logs. Override authority originated from Richard's credentials, authorized by Whitman's compliance signature. Timestamp adjustments correlate with advisory transfers." Chelsea closed her eyes briefly. "Correlation, not speculation, not inference. Correlation." Maya leaned forward. "This establishes intentional sequencing manipulation," she said. Under oath, Richard acknowledged non-disclosure. Whitman acknowledged containment. Chelsea nodded once. They underestimated record integrity. Yes. At 10:27 a.m., A supplemental deposition was scheduled David this time. He would testify regarding the audit memo, the advisory discrepancies, and the timeline leading up to the funeral. Chelsea did not ask to attend. Maya did not suggest it. This was not spectacle. It was structure. At 11:16 a.m., Eleanor's counsel formally requested renewed mediation, this time referencing protection of legacy. Chelsea read the phrase without expression. "They're reframing," Maya said. Legacy, Chelsea repeated. "Yes, it's softer than shielding." Chelsea folded the letter neatly and placed it aside. "No mediation," she said. "Understood." At 12:03 p.m., federal inquiry summaries began circulating in limited legal channels. No criminal charges announced. Not yet. But findings indicated probable cause for structured concealment of advisory sequencing. Structured concealment. Chelsea wrote the phrase in her notebook. She did not underline it. She did not need to. At 1:45 p.m., David called. His voice carried less strain now. "They've mirrored everything he said. Emails, drafts, logs." "That's good," Chelsea replied. "It's thorough." "Yes." A pause. "They asked about Northbridge's origin," he said. "Richard," she asked. "Yes." "Father signed off initially, but after that, Richard expanded its use." "And my mother?" "She knew it existed," David said carefully. "Not how it was used." Chelsea absorbed that. "Will they charge?" she asked. "I don't know." "Will you testify fully?" "Yes." No hesitation. Chelsea leaned back against the apartment wall. "They're offering settlement again," she said. "For what?" he asked. "To separate civil from federal exposure." David exhaled slowly. "They want distance, yes. Will you take it? No." A brief silence followed. "I didn't protect you," he said quietly. Chelsea did not respond immediately. "You tried," she said. "I waited too long." "Yes." Another pause. "Are you staying?" he asked. "For what?" "For this." Chelsea considered. "I'm not staying to win," she said. "I'm staying to finish." He understood. She could hear it in the silence. The line ended without farewell. At 3:08 p.m., deposition excerpts from David's testimony were forwarded to Maya. Chelsea read them carefully. Question: Did you authorize override sequencing? Answer: no. Question: Did you object internally? Answer: yes. Documented. Question: Were you pressured to withdraw audit concerns? Answer: yes. Question: By whom? Answer: Richard Calloway. Chelsea placed the transcript down gently, under oath, not an argument, not in defense. Fact: At 4:26 p.m. Eleanor called for the first time in days. Chelsea answered. "You've aligned yourself with forces that will dismantle this family," Eleanor said. Chelsea did not raise her voice. "The family dismantled itself," she replied. "You could have signed quietly and ignored override logs." "Yes." Chelsea let the silence stretch. "That wasn't alignment," she said. "That was surrender." Eleanor inhaled sharply. "You're not thinking of what comes after." Chelsea looked out the window at the still street below. "I am," she said. "And I won't live in containment." The line ended without further words. At 5:14 p.m., a sealed federal filing indicated escalation from review to formal investigative phase. No arrests, no indictments. But designation shifted. Investigative phase meant depth, means interviews expanded, means transaction tracing across state lines. The 20 SUVs had not been symbolic. They had been beginning. Chelsea closed her laptop. Her notebook lay open on the table. She reviewed the entries from the first night at the motel. 6:58 p.m. funds cleared. 7:03 p.m. residence code changed. Unknown caller. Compensation offered. Those moments had felt immediate then. Now they read as early sequence markers. At 6:02 p.m., Maya joined her at the table. "Federal counsel may request your testimony," she said. "I expected that." "You're prepared?" "Yes." Maya studied her quietly. "You don't want damages framed emotionally. You don't want spectacle. You don't want revenge. No." "What do you want?" Chelsea considered. "Closure through process," she said. Maya nodded once. "That's rarer than you think." At 7:11 p.m., Daniel sent one final update for the day. Richard retained separate criminal counsel. Chelsea closed her eyes briefly. Not satisfaction, not vindication, consequence. She wrote one line beneath it, sequence complete. Not because everything was finished, but because the pattern was fully visible. Override logs, audit memos, public removal, account revocation, settlement offers, under oath admissions, investigative designation. Nothing shouted, nothing theatrical, just alignment of record with action. Chelsea closed her notebook. The woman who had been pushed into rain beneath stained glass had not returned insult for insult. She had not shouted in the vestibule. She had not accepted compensation for silence. She had preserved. And preservation, once structured, became something larger than dignity. It became accountability. Somewhere in Greenwich offices that once operated on handshake logic now functioned under mirrored servers and legal observation. The Calloway name still appeared on buildings, but reputation no longer insulated structure. Chelsea did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply prepared for the final stage. Because investigations did not end in storms, they ended in judgment, and judgment did not raise its voice. The day the SUVs returned, there were fewer of them. Not 20 this time, 8. The spectacle had already occurred. What followed was procedure. Calloway Holdings headquarters no longer felt insulated. Reporters waited beyond the outer gates, now careful not to cross property lines, but present enough to document arrivals and departures. Chelsea did not go there. She watched from a distance through legal updates, through structured calls with Maya, through official notices that no longer required speculation. At 9:06 a.m., federal counsel informed Maya that a negotiated compliance agreement was being drafted. Not immunity, not exoneration, conditional cooperation. Richard Calloway had retained criminal defense. Harold Whitman's firm had withdrawn from direct representation. And Eleanor had requested a private meeting. "She wants to speak to you," Maya said, setting her phone down. Without counsel, Chelsea asked. "No." With counsel present? Neutral location. Chelsea considered for several seconds. "She won't apologize," Maya added. "I'm not expecting that." "Then why agree?" Chelsea looked at her notebook closed, but resting on the table. "Because this is the last time she'll attempt control." The meeting was arranged at a private conference suite in Manhattan neutral ground, neither family estate nor federal office. Eleanor arrived precisely on time. She wore charcoal as she often did, composed, unwavering. No visible strain, though her posture held a tension it had not before. Richard did not attend. David did not attend. Only Eleanor and her newly retained counsel. Maya sat beside Chelsea. No handshakes were exchanged, no pleasantries. Eleanor began. "You've ensured that this matter will not remain contained," she said. Chelsea did not respond immediately. "It was never contained," she replied calmly. Eleanor's gaze sharpened slightly. "You've aligned with federal inquiry. I aligned with record integrity." Eleanor's counsel cleared his throat gently. "We are here to explore resolution of civil claims," he said, "independent of regulatory review." Chelsea folded her hands loosely on the table. "What does resolution mean?" she asked. "Financial compensation," Eleanor said. "Formal separation from trust structures. Confidentiality." The word hung in the air. Confidentiality, again. Maya spoke before Chelsea could. "Confidentiality is not appropriate in matters already under federal investigation." Eleanor did not look at Maya. She looked at Chelsea. "You could have remained within this family," she said. "At what cost?" Chelsea asked quietly. "At continuity." Chelsea considered that. Continuity of what she asked. Silence. Eleanor did not answer. The federal compliance agreement draft, which Maya had reviewed earlier that morning, required full disclosure of advisory routing, override authorization, and internal audit suppression. Richard's name appeared multiple times. Harold's, Thomas's initial authorization, David's documented objections, Eleanor's awareness of preliminary inquiry. Everything that had once existed in layered memos now existed in structured paragraphs. You believe this restores something, Eleanor said finally. No, Chelsea replied. It clarifies something. And what is that? That governance without transparency collapses. Eleanor inhaled slowly. You're not thinking of legacy. Chelsea met her gaze steadily. Legacy doesn't survive concealment. The room fell quiet. Eleanor's counsel shifted slightly. Mrs. Marshall, he said carefully, my client is prepared to offer a significant settlement in exchange for withdrawal of civil claims and a public statement acknowledging misunderstanding rather than misconduct. Chelsea did not look at Maya. She did not ask for the number. She did not request time. No, she said. Eleanor's composure cracked not visibly, not dramatically, but subtly. The tightening of her jaw, the slight lift of her chin. You're choosing damage, she said. No, Chelsea replied. You did. The phrase echoed from deposition day. But this time, it carried no sharpness, only finality. The meeting ended without agreement. Outside, Manhattan moved with its usual indifference, taxis, pedestrians, distant sirens, unrelated to family dynasties. Chelsea walked beside Maya toward the parking garage. She offered you insulation, Maya said. She offered me silence, Chelsea replied. Yes, and you declined. Yes. At 2:12 p.m., federal counsel confirmed that formal investigative filings would proceed to judicial review within the month. Not immediate arrests, not spectacle. Judicial review, procedure. At 3:48 p.m., David called. I heard about the meeting, he said. Yes. She offered settlement. Yes and no. A pause. Thank you, he said. For what? For not separating it. Chelsea leaned against the wall in the apartment hallway. They separated it when they revoked my account, she said. Yes. They separated it when they removed me publicly. Yes. Silence lingered. I'll testify, David said. Fully, I know. They'll try to reduce it to structural misinterpretation. They won't succeed. How are you so certain, he asked. Chelsea considered the question. Because sequence doesn't misinterpret itself, she said. He exhaled quietly. I underestimated how far they'd go. Yes, so did I. At 5:06 p.m., Daniel texted. Compliance agreement draft includes personal liability clause for override authorization. Chelsea did not respond. She did not need to. At 6:22 p.m., news outlets reported that Callaway Holdings had entered into formal cooperation with federal review teams. Language careful, measured. No admissions of guilt, no declarations of innocence, just cooperation. Chelsea sat at the small dining table in the apartment and opened her notebook. She reviewed the earliest entries. Storm, removal, funds cleared, residence code changed, unknown caller, compensation offered, convoy arrival, deposition admissions, compliance review, settlement declined. She turned to a blank page and wrote, Integrity does not negotiate with concealment. Then she closed the notebook. The SUVs that had once moved in coordinated silence had completed their function. They had not come for her. They had come for sequence. And sequence had led back to the beginning to override logs, advisory shells, accelerated signatures, public removal. Chelsea stood at the window and looked out over the quiet street. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only steadiness. The final stage would not be loud. It would not involve storms. It would be written. And writing once entered into judicial record did not erase easily. Judgment did not arrive with sirens. It arrived in a sealed envelope. 3 weeks after the Manhattan meeting, Chelsea sat across from Maya in the same quiet conference room where they had first reviewed the church footage. Morning light angled through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the table. Maya placed the envelope down between them. Judicial review concluded, she said. Chelsea did not reach for it immediately. She waited, not out of fear, out of recognition. This was the part that could not be undone. Finally, she opened it. The language inside was precise, restrained, and almost clinical. Callaway Holdings entered into a structured compliance agreement with federal authorities. Full disclosure of advisory sequencing required. Independent financial monitor appointed. Civil penalties assessed. Personal liability assigned to Richard Callaway for unauthorized override concealment. formal censure of Harold Whitman for compliance misrepresentation. Thomas Calloway's estate, identified as original authorizing body for advisory buffering structure, but expansion deemed materially deceptive, post-initial authorization. David Calloway acknowledged as internal audit originator and cooperating witness. No charges recommended. Chelsea read the final paragraph twice. Civil claims filed by Mrs. Chelsea Marshall recognized as materially contributory to preservation of evidence. Coercive revocation of access and residential restriction deemed retaliatory conduct. Financial restitution ordered. Additional damages assessed for unlawful account interference. Chelsea closed the document carefully. No smile, no visible release. Maya studied her. "You won," she said quietly. Chelsea shook her head once. "No," she replied. It aligned. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the street. No cameras waited. No reporters hovered. The convoy had long since disappeared. Procedure had replaced spectacle. At 11:32 a.m., David arrived. He entered the conference room without escort, without ceremony. He looked thinner, quieter, but clearer. Maya excused herself, leaving them alone. For a moment, neither spoke. Then David stepped forward. "I read the decision," he said. "Yes, I'm no longer under advisory restriction." "I know." He looked at her carefully. "You could have taken the settlement," he said. "Yes, you didn't." "No." A pause. "I'm sorry," he said again. Chelsea met his gaze. "You hesitated," she said. "Yes." "But you documented." "Yes." That mattered. David nodded slowly. Richard had resigned from executive leadership 2 days prior to the judicial conclusion. No press conference, no public apology, just a filing. Harold Whitman's firm released a brief statement regarding restructuring. Eleanor had not called. She had not written. Silence now was no longer leverage. It was absence. At 2:04 p.m., Maya returned with additional paperwork. "Financial restitution will be processed within 10 business days," she said. "Residential status is legally yours to determine." Chelsea considered that. The Greenwich house, the long walnut table, the vestibule under stained glass. "I won't return," she said. Maya nodded. "I thought not." David watched her. "Where will you go?" he asked. Chelsea looked down at her notebook resting closed in her bag. "Somewhere without containment," she said. It was not dramatic. It was not grand. It was practical. At 3:18 p.m., Chelsea drove alone to Greenwich for the first time since the storm. Not to reclaim, to conclude. The estate gates opened automatically. The trust remained intact, though altered now by oversight. Inside, the house felt larger, quieter, not hostile, just hollow. She walked through the rooms slowly. Kitchen, study, dining room. The console table in the entryway where the second folder had waited. Upstairs, the master bedroom closet still held a few of David's older suits. She did not linger there. Instead, she gathered only what was hers. Personal documents, books, clothing, the navy notebook from the bedside drawer. She carried one suitcase to the front door. As she stepped outside, the afternoon sky was clear. No storm, no witnesses, no hands on her arm. The church stood visible down the road, stone facade unchanged. She did not drive there. She did not need to. At 4:02 p.m., Eleanor's car entered the driveway. Chelsea paused. Eleanor stepped out. For a moment, they stood facing one another across the gravel. No security, no counsel, no observers. Eleanor approached slowly. "You've dismantled everything," she said. Chelsea shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "You built it that way." Eleanor's composure wavered, but she did not look away. "You could have stayed," she said. "At what cost?" Chelsea asked again. Eleanor did not answer. The wind shifted lightly through the trees. "You believe this was justice," Eleanor said. "It was process," Chelsea replied. A long silence followed. Eleanor's shoulders seemed smaller than Chelsea remembered. "You won't come back," she said. No, not even for David. Chelsea considered that. "David can come forward," she said. "Not cruel, not sharp, just honest." Eleanor studied her for a final moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. No apology, no reconciliation, only consequence. Chelsea placed her suitcase in the trunk of her car and closed it gently. She did not look back as she drove down the driveway. At 4:27 p.m., she passed St. Bartholomew's Church. The stone steps were dry, empty, unremarkable. She did not slow. By evening, she reached a small rental townhouse in a neighboring state neutral, unconnected to trusts or advisory shells. She carried her suitcase inside, set it down, opened the Navy notebook one final time. The first page still held the earliest entries. Storm, removal, funds cleared, unknown caller, convoy arrival. She turned to the last blank page and wrote, "Integrity does not shout." Then she closed it, not as an ending, as completion. There was no revenge speech, no press statement, no dramatic confrontation. Only sequence concluded. Chelsea Marshall had not raised her voice in the vestibule. She had not negotiated silence for compensation. She had not returned humiliation for humiliation. She had recorded, she had preserved, she had aligned with process. And when judgment came, it did not roar. It confirmed. She turned off the light in the small townhouse and stood for a moment in the quiet. Not triumphant, not broken, just free of containment. In the end, justice rarely sounds like thunder. It sounds like paper turning, like keys pressed into record, like words spoken under oath and not withdrawn. Chelsea was never the loudest person in the room. She did not fight with accusations. She did not answer humiliation with spectacle. She answered it with documentation. And documentation, when patient and precise, outlives noise. If this story stayed with you, take a quiet moment to reflect on where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Every place has its own storms. Every clock moves differently. If you believe strength doesn't have to shout to be powerful, you're welcome to stay connected here. Like, comment. Subscribe, not for drama, but for stories where dignity walks out the door without lowering its head.